Immediately, though everything else remained as before, dim and dark, the shapes became terribly clear. He was able to see beneath their black wrappings. There were 5 tall figures, 2 standing on the lip of the dell, 3 advancing. In their white faces burned keen and merciless eyes. Under their mantles were long gray robes. Upon their gray hairs were helms of silver. In their haggard hands were swords of steel.
Welcome to the Wayward Wizards podcast. Today we're reading Chapter 11, Book 1 of Fellowship of the Ring, A Knife in the Dark.
Heck yeah.
His name is Zach.
His name's Logan.
Yeah. A Knife in the Dark. This is a cool one.
Oh, man. Let's freaking go. Like,
it's so cool. Aragorn's like doing his thing.
Out in the wild.
It starts, I completely forgot. I mean, I just read this, but I like...
Oh, the fire foes awake.
I forgot about Fatty, man.
Fatty.
It's like a hero moment here.
Fatty is just like pitching 105.
Hell yeah. Fatty Bolger, baby. He's
Fire foes awake.
So good.
So good.
There was a brooding threat in the breathless night air. I underlined that sentence. There was a brooding threat in the breathless night air. That's some great prose right there.
Open in the name of Mordor.
Oh man, so good.
I love how it says that, like, you know, he describes the figure clothed in black approaching the door, and then he draws his long blade, and it says there was a blow, soft but heavy, and the door shuddered. Like, he's not banging on it, but there's like
one boom. Then he hits it another time and it falls in. It like bursts apart.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Timbers burst and lock broken. The black figures passed swiftly in. At that moment, among the trees nearby, a horn rang out. It rent the night like a fire on a hilltop. Fatty Bolger had not been idle. Not Fatty. I love it.
Couldn't be Fatty. Yeah. Oh, I just love, like, you know, we get so many like little things here. Like, in the horn call of Buckland capitalized.
This is like a Helm's Deep moment.
This is like the Bucklanders, you know, they're blowing their horn and they're running. I love that it talks about how, like, it hadn't happened since the time that the Brandywine froze over and the wolves crossed.
In 100 years, it hadn't been blown.
That's so cool.
I think they should blow it occasionally just to make sure everything's cool.
Like a fire alarm.
I was a little worried. Like the tornado. Like when I was a kid in South Dakota, once a month during the summertime, the tornado sirens would go off. You know,
right?
And that was to make sure that the things worked, because you know, if there's a tornado, so I think they should probably be blowing it more often. However, it's pretty cool. I think it's like a Helm's Deep moment. The horn call of Buckland. I mean, it's like amazing. And that activity, it really, I mean, it works. Like the Black Riders flee. You know?
They say, let the little people blow. Sauron will deal with them later.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that never happens, but it's fine.
This is an example of something that we've cited a few times, which is Tolkien drastically changing the direction of the story, but falling in love with dialogue and keeping the dialogue exactly as it is, just putting it in the mouth of a different person. So in earlier drafts of this chapter, the fire foes awake. Do you want to take a guess who calls the Bucklanders with fire foes awake? You want to take a wild guess?
I have no idea.
It's somebody we already know.
I don't know. Fire foes awake. Maybe Tom Bombadil.
No.
Oh.
Gandalf.
Oh, I did say Gandalf. I was right.
Oh, did you say Gandalf earlier?
Yeah, I just said it quietly because I was embarrassed.
It was Gandalf. He
That
like
sounds like something he would say, actually.
he musters the Bucklanders, fire foes awake, and it just like didn't match later with the direction of like, you know, Gandalf just recently being, out of Isengard.
It feels like a Gandalfian. There's like a mood to it. Yeah,
It's got the
that's
same
cool.
kind of mood as like ride now, ride to Red Dawn and Death. You know, like it's got that kind of like ancientry feeling to it of fire foes awake. You know, but it's interesting because like there's not a fire.
No, that's true.
It's just like the thing that you say when you want to get people
Roused.
Yeah, like get them
and
moving.
I love that the main horn gets echoed with other horns. So like
Yeah,
people, like the alarm sort of goes out, you know, through the whole community, and it seems like everybody is sort of activated, you know, toward, even if they don't know what they're reacting to, like
yeah, they're all screaming fire.
Cool. That's great.
But then of course, like Frodo, he with his like
a dream sequence,
his like weird prescience again, he hears the horn blowing in his dreams, and then it like kind of like dissolves into a cock crowing. Which it really echoes like when he had the dream about Gandalf and the type of Isengard, and then he wakes up to one of the hobbits. Was it Mary with a candle and knocking on the door? It's like lightning and thunder, and it's a candle and knocking.
Right.
So this one dissolves into a cock crowing. They wake up and they find that the room that they would have been sleeping in has been just absolutely demolished.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're, you know, they've been in the other room. Like, did they not hear all this happening?
Well, it says that Butterbur slept through it. Well, it says he hardly closed his eyes all night. So he said, but he never heard a sound.
The windows had been forced open and were swinging, and the curtains were flapping. The beds were tossed about, and the bolsters slashed and flung upon the floor. The brown mat was torn to pieces. That's like so violent. It's just interesting that neither the hobbits nor Butterbur like heard all this going on. So it's kind of adds to the creepiness of it.
So I think we take that to mean Butterbur fell asleep.
Yeah.
Because that's how he rolls. He's not the kind of guy who can stay up all night.
No.
Not without, you know, like a Lord of the Rings podcast to listen to. And then the hobbits, I mean, of course they slept through the night too, but Strider didn't hear anything either. So
that's weird.
So are the Black Riders, are they really capable of doing this very quietly, you know?
I get the sense, you know, they're like these like ghostly figures who can kind of just like come in without a sound and slash everything up.
I noticed in this chapter how much they sort of, at certain points, they take on sort of menacing physical powers, like being able to like, you know, slam a door open, like break the lock of a door.
That's a great point.
Just by hitting it a couple times. But then in this case, they're able to move really quietly, and then later on at Weathertop, they're almost more like shades or shadows than they are like people, and it's dark, I guess. But
yeah, that's a great point. But
it's not like they don't have a single way of kind of being. They kind of like fade in and out or something like that.
That's a great point.
So I sort of question like, what are their powers and like how do they actually exist? You know, we've talked about how far they are from Mordor and that kind of diminishes what they're capable of.
Yeah.
But it seems like at certain times they're able to be pretty physically menacing, and others they're not. So
yeah, that's a good point. We'll have to definitely like kind of bookmark when we get to. There's a description, like a pretty. I was actually surprised at how descriptive Tolkien was about their nature. It's on page 189 in my edition. So we'll definitely like get to that, because I mean he talks about like not only how they look but also like how they perceive the world and all kinds of
really
things.
Interesting.
Interestingly, again, there's another mention of going to the moon, which I hadn't clocked.
Where was that?
Well, so they find out that their ponies have been stolen.
Right.
And that's catastrophic because they have this huge journey ahead of them. So like the stable doors are open and all of Mary's ponies are gone, which also they're all Mary's ponies, which kind of
Signals
that Merry is wealthy. So he
Mary's
owns
got the funds to buy a bunch of ponies.
Yeah, and it's a horrendous calamity to happen, to lose all your ponies, because the journey to Rivendell is so far,
Right.
and they don't know if they can carry the amount of food that they need for like at least a 2-week journey to get to Rivendell. And it says Frodo was crushed by the news. How could they hope to reach Rivendell on foot, pursued by mounted enemies? They might as well have set out for the moon.
Oh, yeah, interesting.
And earlier, Sam said of following Frodo, like, I would follow him if he went to the moon. So it's, the moon is held up as like this impossible thing to reach, which,
right.
Yeah.
Not in America, it's not.
Sorry for everything bad we did, but going to the moon was pretty awesome.
It was pretty.
But Aragorn is like, how much are you willing to carry on your backs? And I love
that.
Pippin, with a sinking heart, says, as much as I must, trying to show that he is tougher than he looked or felt, which he's the youngest of the group. And so you can just feel for this short little guy being like, I can carry as much as I need to. And then Sam being like, I can carry enough for 2.
Yeah, I'm tough.
So there's definitely still a little bit of distrust between Sam and Aragorn. Like he's trying to show, that he's tough. And we had Aragorn making fun of Sam last week. Not only like saying like, hey, I could pull this sword out and strike you down right now.
Yeah.
Like if I wanted to kill you, you'd be dead. But he also does the like you said, the kind of condescending, as long as it's okay with Master Samwise. And so I think there's probably still some, and like towards the end of this chapter, when Aragorn goes to pursue the Black Riders, it says that Sam assumed that Aragorn was like going to join them.
Yeah.
So there's still a lot of distrust between Sam and Aragorn, which I think is worth noting.
Yeah, he's a skeptical. He's pretty skeptical of anybody outside of their party. I really appreciate Pippin's courage.
Yeah.
As much as we must. It says that he says it with a sinking heart, but it doesn't say that he says it in a sort of timid way.
No, or even in a complaining way.
Yeah, he's like, we're going to do this, but he's also like, I mean, that shows how much courage he has, because he's really not excited about.
No. Yeah, and that's one thing I never really appreciated. Whenever you're reading adventure stories and they're walking really long distances, like that's just miserable.
So that's how much weight they lose later on in the chapter too, that Frodo
already. Yeah.
It's a little, he says he's like wasting away. Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. He says, I have to be careful or else I'll become a wraith.
And Aragorn scorns him. But we'll get there.
We'll get there.
I also like that within the space of a page, Aragorn says that we'll have to leave at once. Never mind about breakfast.
Yeah.
A drink and a bite to eat will have to do. So no more hobbitry.
Yeah.
But then it turns out, here's a crumb for comfort, says Merry. And more than a crumb, I hope. We can have breakfast while we wait and sit down to it. Let's get a hold of Knob.
That's great.
So even though Aragorn's like, we got to get going. It's like, the ponies are gone. It's like, well, I guess we can have breakfast.
It's like, well, yeah, small favors. I mean, one, we were sad about missing breakfast. So, it's not all bad.
It's not all bad.
But yeah, they had planned on leaving right away. That gets dashed when the ponies are there. And I think it's interesting that Aragorn says, we might as well have blown a horn to announce our departure, which we just had a horn blowing from Fatty and the horn of Buckland. Well, I guess Fatty's probably not blowing the horn. He's probably just...
it says that he gets to the nearest house more than a mile away, collapsed on the doorstep, and all he says is, no, 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 he was crying. No, not me. I haven't got it. It was some time before anyone could make out what he was babbling about. At last, they got the idea that enemies were in Buckland, some strange invasion from the old forest.
And that's what triggers blowing the horn.
He's pretty smart. He leaves, even though he's terrified.
Right.
He leaves kind of out the back window as soon as he can.
Yeah. Yeah. And he runs a mile, so I guess he can't be that fat. Like he sprints a mile.
Sometimes big boys can move if they have to.
we're definitely not speaking from experience. I have in my notes here, right next to, we might as well have blown a horn to announce our departure, I have compared to Boromir. Do you remember the last time we read this together, how when they set off from Rivendell as the company of 9, that Boromir blows a horn?
Yeah, he blows the horn of Gondor. Is that right?
That's right. And everybody's like, what are you doing? Like, and he's like, oh, I never start a journey without blowing a horn. And Aragorn is like, all right, we're supposed to be like incognito here, and you're blowing a horn. Not exactly stealthy. But I think it's interesting here. You have like a little bit of a foreshadowing of that. Aragorn's like, the worst thing we could do to start this journey is to blow a horn.
Is blow a horn. Yeah, that's interesting. No, I didn't notice that before, for sure. But this leaving ends up being a lot more momentous than, they were kind of going to sneak out the door in the first thing in the
first light of morning, and instead it turns into this whole thing. I mean, they have to negotiate buying the pony from Bill Fernie. Bill Fernie, who's a scum of the earth.
Yeah, he's a scummy guy. He's not a
total scumbag. I mean, and like he's been cavorting with the enemy. The half goblin guy is in his house. Apparently, he kind of peeks his head through the window. And
I think we should talk more about that too.
About the squint-eyed southerner.
Yeah, I mean, is that a little bit of racism on Tolkien's part?
I think like if Tolkien was writing this in the modern time, he would get a lot of pushback for using the word squint-eyed in a derogatory way.
I mean, it could also just mean like a guy who's kind of got like a nasty look on his face,
kind of a scowl. A
scowl, like he's just got a scowly face, but it sort of borders on like a little bit of Orientalism or something.
Yeah, and I mean, there's lots of things that we could get into. I mean, he also like uses the word swarthy to describe people who are, the orcs are described as dark skinned. So it's definitely. I mean, there's some things that are kind of unsettling about it. I mean, I think the big takeaway for me on this reading is just like, what does it mean to be a half goblin?
Does he look half goblin, or he is half goblin? That's my question.
I think the implication is that he is literally a melding of two species. He's maybe like a proto Uruk-hai. He's part of that breeding program that leads to the Uruk-hai. I think that's definitely like the implication is that the bad guys are messing around with creating new species of bad guy. Whether it's trolls that are able to walk in the sunshine, or if it's Uruk-hai who are like orcs that are able to be out in the full sunlight without being harmed by it.
I want to acknowledge that that's a legitimate reading, a possible reading.
Yeah.
But I think it's wrong. Because here's why. We're told Frodo saw a dark, ill-kept house behind a thick hedge, the last house in the village. In one of the windows, he caught a glimpse of a sallow face with sly, slanting eyes. We already talked about that. But it vanished at once. Quote, so that's where that southerner is hiding, he thought. He looks more than half like a goblin. Has Frodo ever seen a goblin?
Oh, that's a good point.
He has heard descriptions of goblins from Bilbo.
Yeah.
And I think this guy is like, you can tell that he's less than trustworthy, right? He's there to do the hobbits harm. He's the implication is that he's an agent of, Sauron or something.
That he's giving information to the Black Riders, yeah.
And he's working with like the meanest guy in town, Bill Fernie.
Yep.
But I don't know if he's I don't know if he's actually a half goblin. I sort of, the reason I am trying to read it this way is because I kind of love the idea that he's a half goblin, and like I really like that reading, that he's been twisted in some way, or there's some kind of messed up like
breeding,
Mordor breeding project or whatever.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, we do get that with Sauron, so it's not outside of the realm of possibility. I just don't know if I trust Frodo in this moment to like clock somebody as a half goblin.
The way that I've come to read it is that he is at least in league with Mordor, but it's the first indication that we get that there's some strange like breeding program that the enemy is participating in. That
I can see it.
It's like a kind of a throwaway, like, oh, he looks half like a goblin, and then we find out later that there are half goblin, half men. So it's at least a foreshadowing of that this is something that happens. But I mean, I think that the main thing to know is that he is definitely, giving information to the Black Riders, and Bill Fernie is like in league with this person. So like Bill Fernie is like, he's not directly in league with the enemy, but he's okay with, working with people who are. Yeah,
he's a nasty dude, and he's involved with some pretty nasty guys. I mean, who have evil intentions for Frodo. I kind of love the idea. I never thought of this before, but I love the idea that like the Black Riders are there representing Sauron, and this guy, if he is some kind of hybrid, whatever, orc, human person, that he's there representing Saruman.
Interesting.
And there's actually like even another party involved, even at this point. I don't think that's actually like, that's a pretty big leap. I think it's not like indicated in the text, but
yeah.
But if we then think about the Uruk-hai, like maybe it is, and it makes it that much more complicated and sort of political in a way that's kind of satisfying, I think. But.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, there's definitely like just like hints and indications that there's things that are coming. But yeah, Bill Fernie, what a piece of crap Bill Fernie is.
Not a good dude.
Charges them way too much money for this half-starved horse.
5 times as much as the horse is worth, or the pony is worth, something like that. And Mr. Butterbird, this is a Menchie thing. Mr. Butterbird paid for it himself and offered Mary another 18 pence as some compensation for the lost animals. So he takes, responsibility for the animals being lost because they were lost in his stable, I guess.
Yes.
I don't think he had to do that, but the worst part is that he was cheated by Bill Fernie.
Yeah. Yeah. He just didn't like that he paid, like exponentially marked up rate. But I also love that Tolkien just like takes the time to like assure the reader that.
Yeah. If you were worried about the ponies, Mary's ponies had escaped together.
Yeah.
And they've they're a little bit magical now because they hung out with
Bombadil and Lumpkin. Yeah.
With Fatty Lumpkin. And so they get back to the Downs in search of Fatty Lumpkin. Fatty Lumpkin is like, like the wizard of ponydom. And then Tom hears the news about what happened at Bree, and he sends them back to Mr. Butterbur. They had to work harder in Bree, but Rob treated them well.
Yeah.
So on the whole, they were lucky. And I love this. They missed a dark and dangerous journey, but they never got to go to Rivendell.
Yeah.
So like even a horse would love to go to Rivendell.
Yeah.
It's that kind of amazing of a place.
Yeah. Bill Fernie, or not Bill Fernie, Bill the Pony. Wait, we haven't talked about
Bill
the fact
Pony.
That Bill the Pony has the exact same name as Bill Fernie.
Which does he get a name in this chapter? I don't think he does yet.
We'll have to just mark, like, at what point does the pony they got from Bill Fernie become Bill the Pony? I think it says explicitly that Sam named him. So I guess the question is, did Sam name the pony after Bill Fernie?
Yeah, is that as creative as Sam gets? I don't know.
And I think we talked about the fact that Sam's full name is Samwise, which basically means like dumbass.
Thick skull.
Yeah, he's dim-witted. He's
dimwit, yeah.
Or he's wise about things that are like earthy, like gardening, but he's not a super intelligent guy.
Yeah, he's definitely not worldly.
He's not like in an ivory tower somewhere.
He's simple. He's a simple guy.
He's a simple guy, even though he's a poet. He's learned his letters, meaning no harm now.
He's a pretty complex character.
And he's one of the main authors of the book that we're reading, according to the world within the text. So he's not that big of a dummy. But it's a funny thing. I never clocked until I texted you about it a couple nights ago. I was like, wait a minute. The pony's name is Bill, And the
Yeah.
person that he came from is named Bill.
And it's the worst person you could name it the horse after, the pony after.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, name it after anyone else. You know,
That's really funny. Yeah. So Bill Jr., the pony, is, haggard and underfed and sickly looking, but he already loves his turn of fate because he's now with Sam, his true soulmate.
Yeah, he gets away from Bill Fernie, and it says he already looked less dejected, as if it approved of the changes in its fortunes.
Yeah.
And then we have Sam chewing an apple, which I kind of think of ponies as eating apples, and so like again we sort of have Sam kind of like, he's like a dog, he's like a pony,
he's a beast of burden,
he's like,
literally.
He's a beast of burden. He's like willing to carry 2 packs when everybody else has one. And
what does he say? A pipe for sitting and an apple for walking?
Yeah, a pipe for sitting, he said. Or apples for walking and a pipe for sitting, he said. But I reckon I'll miss them both before long. And then Bill Fernie's there to, as they're in this kind of parade out of town with, King Aragorn in the lead. We have Bill Fernie. He calls Strider morning Longshanks, he said. Off early. Found some friends at last. Strider doesn't say anything.
Of course not. He's too dignified to give that as
then
a response.
Fernie calls Strider stick it not. That's stick it not Strider, that is. What is that?
I don't know. Like maybe like stick it not, like you don't, like you're flighty, you don't stay in one place.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
I never caught that he calls him stick it not, though. That's interesting.
It's sort of saying he's like undependable or something like that, maybe.
Exactly. He says, though I've heard other names not so pretty. And he goes, and you, Sammy, don't go ill-treating my poor old pony. And he spits.
This is my favorite word, Sam. Sam doesn't take any guff from anybody. It doesn't matter if it's Strider or Bill Fernie. Yeah. And you, Fernie, he said, put your ugly face out of sight or it'll get hurt. With a sudden flick, quick as lightning, an apple left his hand and hit Bill square on the nose. And we heard that detail earlier that hobbits are really good with a rock. Like they can take down...
They don't carry swords. They don't carry bows.
They can kind of take down game with a rock, like if they needed to.
Yeah. It's one of their like magical qualities is that they're able to hide really good. They're able to walk really quietly, and they're able to throw rocks.
And they got a mean fastball.
Their XP for rock throwing is like, through the
plus 5.
Yeah.
Waste of a good apple, said Sam. Fernie had it coming though. I just loved it. I love the idea that, Sam literally gives Fernie a bloody nose here.
Sam, a little bit of an assault right before the beginning of their journey.
Only takes, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and the top of a page to get out of Buckland.
Oh, the irony of them, saying they wanted to leave quickly, and then just they get delayed, and then they cause all this ruckus, and then they have to go find all the horses are gone, which causes this big stir. And then before they leave, now they have all of the surrounding villages are coming to see them off. It's like exactly the opposite of what you wanted. But you mentioned briefly there, King Aragorn. Say more about that.
Yeah, it says that Strider seemed to be held in awe by most of the Breelanders. And those that he stared at shut their mouths and drew away.
Yeah.
He walked in front with Frodo. And then we get this procession. Next came Merry and Pippin. And last Sam leading the pony, which was laden with much of their baggage as they had heart to give it. And so I sort of imagine both sides of the street lined with people, as well as people up in the second stories hanging out of windows.
Watching the whole thing go down.
And to me, and this is the first time that I had this thought, but to me, Aragorn's kingship is sort of apparent to even in his guise as Strider to the people who see him. And he's at the lead of this procession out of town, or this parade out of town. Yeah. As they go off on their quest, they don't blow a horn, but they could have, right?
Yeah.
And so, I think it echoes the time in Return of the King where, he's the king that returns.
And in fact, when they make their stop at Butterbeer's inn, there's such great symmetry here. Like Butterbeer's like, I hate to see you go under these circumstances, and Frodo's like, I hope that I can come back, and there's nothing more that I would love than to like stay in your inn in peace. And like we get that at the end. But yeah, there's lots of good symmetry there where they do get that time of peace in Butterbeer's house. Mm-hmm. And when they tell Butterbeer that the king is coming back and he's going to be like essentially processing through their streets, Butterbeer's like, oh, that's amazing. Like, can't wait. And they're like, and you've met him. And he's like, what? I've met this. They're like, yeah, his name's Strider, but his true name is Aragorn. And he's like, what? Like you can't, like he's that
like dumbfounded,
like that guy. But there's so much distrust of Aragorn, among, the common folk here, but even the people who distrust him, they can't help but recognize his power. He's able to shut them up just by looking at them. It's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah. It's cool. So they finally get out of town.
Yeah. They finally start. One thing that I just noted about this is that when we were in the Barrow Downs, we talked about how it really only been like the whole story had really only been like a couple days. Like it was a really short amount of time. We're coming up to some pretty big jumps in time here where the narrator will just kind of like drop like, okay, it's been 6 days now since they left Bree. And that happens in the book now much more consistently, where a couple weeks of walking will go by and there's not really much that's talked about. You just know that they were just trudging along for a couple weeks. But they make
a bunch of ground here.
Because it's a long journey. So if we were moving at the pace that we had been moving on the road to Rivendell, the length of the book would just get even bigger than it already is. But Strider, he's confident. He's taking a shortcut off road to get to Rivendell. And Pippin's like, oh my God, no more shortcuts, please. Like, the last shortcut. The last shortcut was anything but a shortcut. The last shortcut we took was terrible. But Strider's like, my cuts, short or long, don't go off course, which is pretty.
Don't go wrong. I love that.
That's pretty awesome. But it's not easy going. I mean, they are getting bit up by bugs.
Tolkien is very impressed with his naming of this area where all the midges are.
The Neekbreaks.
Midgewater Marshes. He says it here.
Yeah.
And then he says it again that they're drawing near to the Midgewater Marshes.
Yeah.
And then Pippin cries, Midgewater.
Yeah.
There are more midges than water.
Yeah, I mean, midge is like just like a tiny little bug, like a
bug, or like a I think of a mosquito sort of.
Yeah.
That's not exactly what a midge is. Midge is more like a biting fly, I think. But,
but annoying. Like we all know that feeling of walking and just being swamped by.
It's the worst, and getting bit like that, and then it itches later on. It's terrible. But it seems like they're in this area through these marshes for like a couple days of walking.
Yeah.
And they even have to sleep there. I love this detail about what Sam calls the Knickerbreakers.
Yeah.
It says there are also abominable creatures haunting the reeds and tussocks, that from the sound of them were evil relatives of the cricket.
Evil relatives of the cricket is so good.
There were thousands of them, and they squeaked all around. Neek, breek, breek, neek, unceasingly all night, until the hobbits were nearly frantic. They can't even it's like driving them nuts. But they do leave the Knickerbreakers behind, and I love that Sam names them the Knickerbreakers.
Yeah, it's so great, and it's such a
he can't come up with a name for his pony
other than
he
Bill.
He names the pony Bill, which is a good name for a pony. I think it's a great name for a pony.
It's kind of like when you meet a dog with like a human name.
I always thought Jeremy was the funniest name for a dog, or David.
Yeah, David. David would be a great name for a dog. My dog's literal name, and we didn't name him this because he was adopted, is Lawrence.
Yeah, that's a hilarious name for a dog.
It's hilarious. But Bill for
you
pony.
Call him Larry?
No, we never call him Larry. We just call him Lawrence.
Lawrence. I mean, but then Sam comes up with this great name, Knickerbreakers.
Oh, so he's not as dumb as he seems.
No, we got to be nicer to Sam.
Apart from Fatty Bolger, I think we can both agree that Sam is probably our favorite character. So
I love Sam.
We're not throwing shade on Sam, but he's not the smartest.
No, it comes from a loving place.
But then they right after this, they start to see Weathertop in the distance. Now, okay, why are they going to Weathertop exactly? Like that's one question.
Like, maybe the logical place that Gandalf would meet them.
I just like that just seems less obvious to me. That I take it as like, you know, take it as true because Aragorn says it in the story, but you know,
yeah,
it's just like they haven't told Gandalf to meet them there.
No.
But I guess it's just really the only landmark between Rivendell and Bree. And so, and it's high up so they can kind of like see the surrounding area, but what exactly are they going to see? But I guess it's kind of just like the midpoint. And so they're like, this is really the only, like, this is a vast wilderness with nothing in it. So we're just going to go there and hope that we run into Gandalf, but they're able to see it before they get to it. And they see lightning off in the distance, which, you know, we later find out was Gandalf fighting the Nazgul. Yeah. So there's, you know, they're hoping to find Gandalf there. They see the lightning in the distance, and there's a little throwaway line here that says, not all the birds are to be trusted, and there are other spies more evil than they are. You know, so this is a vast wilderness and there's really nothing there, but they really can't even trust local fauna.
I think it also gives some interest to the fox.
Yeah.
You know, who sees them, that there is a way in which animals are enchanted in some way. Not that they're magical, but there's like an enchantment in the story where animals have some agency or something that we typically don't think of them as having.
Yeah.
And that goes, you know, that goes to the ponies too, you know, to the pony who would be Bill, you know, kind of seeming to perk up that now he doesn't have to live with Bill Fernie and he's got a mission, you know, and that's kind of what he's made for.
Yeah.
And the fox having that thought, I don't think I would just dismiss that as like a, you know, flight of fancy on Tolkien's part. Like he actually believes that.
Yeah.
I think he believes that about his own world. Like
I think he believes it about trees.
Yeah. He when he walks and he sees a squirrel and there's a squirrel in his path, like that means something to Tolkien.
Yeah.
Yeah. And frankly, like outside of the West, particularly like in indigenous cultures, and I'm not trying to like draw a strong tie between Tolkien and like indigenous cultures, like understanding of the way that creation works, but there is an enchantment to the world.
Yeah.
And so this idea that like, yeah, there are some birds you can't trust because they work for Sauron, you know?
Yeah.
I like that. That's a cool detail.
Yeah. They're in this wilderness that is dangerous. They don't have enough food. This is miserable. You know, I mean, they're getting bit. This sounds like the worst hike you can imagine. You're being pursued by enemies that are trying to kill you.
Yeah.
You're walking a distance that's like, it seems like it's not even a set distance. Like at one point they ask like Aragorn, like how far away it is. And he's like, nobody
from Weathertop, right? Or from Bree, I guess.
Once they get to Weathertop and they see the runes that Gandalf leaves, Merry says, how far is Rivendell? The world looked wild and wide from Weathertop. And Aragorn says, I don't know if the road has ever been measured in miles beyond the Forsaken Inn, which I don't know what the Forsaken Inn is.
What is that? It must be the last inn between Bree and Rivendell.
Not mentioned up to this point, as far as I know.
Strange. Yeah.
It says the Forsaken Inn is a day's journey east of Bree. Some say it is so far, and some say otherwise. It's a strange road, and folk are glad to reach their journey's end, whether the time is long or short. So basically saying he's like, it's a really long road, but it also seems like it's enchanted in some way that like, you know, Rivendell doesn't really want to be found.
Yeah.
And it's going to,
so maybe it takes longer for others than it does for Strider. It takes Strider 2 weeks walking.
Yeah. We get this great line that we mentioned earlier where, they're going through like this horrendous march, and it says Pippin declared that Frodo was looking twice the hobbit as he had been. And Frodo said, very odd, considering that there is actually a good deal less of me. I hope the thinning process will not go indefinitely, or I shall become a wraith. Mm-hmm. And by the end of this chapter, that's going to be a real possibility.
Absolutely.
Great little bit of foreshadowing there. And Aragorn snaps at him and tells him not to say that.
And they're walking and they're taking these, it is miserable. They're taking these switchbacks.
Yeah.
And, Strider's doing ranger things to, stop their way being tracked by others. And so it's probably taking even longer than it would to get to Weathertop. And when they finally do get there, only a few of them actually go up.
Yeah, it's just
the top of Weathertop.
It's just Merry, Frodo, and Aragorn.
And actually, before we even get there, we have all these details about what is Weathertop,
Yeah.
And what are these, because the hobbits think it looks like barrows.
Yeah.
And Aragorn says, no, they aren't barrows, and there's no barrow on Weathertop, but this was a place where the men of the West had a fortress. Yeah. And they defended the hills here against the evil that came out of Angmar.
Yeah. So it's made by the same people who are buried in the Downs.
Yeah, in the Downs.
But it was, a fortress built by these people from Numenor who had this northern kingdom. And
they called it Amansul.
Amansul.
Which, I don't know, I didn't look up what that actually means, but it was burned, and this is so Tolkien, it was burned and broken, and nothing remains of it now but a tumbled ring.
Yeah.
Like a rough crown on the old hill's head.
Yeah, very similar to the Barrow Downs descriptions.
Yeah, he says, yet once it was tall and fair, and that's like the most Tolkien thing.
Yeah.
It used to be tall and fair, now it's fallen into, ruin.
Fading, disrepair, death, yeah.
Yeah. And I was told that once Elendil stood there watching for the coming of Gil-galad out of the west.
Yeah.
In the days of the last alliance. And again, it's like one of those details where we were like, what?
Yeah.
What is that? You know?
Yeah.
It's this world that's been lived in, for thousands of years. It didn't just get created out of thin air.
There are two stories that they tell in this chapter that are stories that get fleshed out in much, much greater detail in the Silmarillion.
Yeah.
But you have the story of Gil-galad and Elendil, and they even mention the lay of Gil-galad that Sam is able to recite lines from that he was taught by Bilbo when he was learning how to read. And that is a story of the Second Age. And then we have the lay of Luthien, Luthien Tinuviel. It's a story of Beren and Luthien, which is a story from the First Age. And for 30 years, the only versions of these stories that we would have before the Silmarillion came out was in the Lord of the Rings. But the sections of the story that we get, there's such a sense that they are like fully fleshed out stories in Tolkien's mind. But we only get, it's like we're looking at it through a keyhole. Mm-hmm. We only see like a small sliver of it. One of the best descriptions of this that came from Tolkien himself was that what he was trying to do with his stories was that, you were like out on the ocean in a ship and you could see an island off in the distance. And you knew that if you diverted your ship, you could, land on the shore and you could go and walk around in the mountains and, see everything there is to see about it. But we just don't have time. Like we have a place to go. So we're on the ship and we're going. So we only get to like see it from a distance. But
yeah, that kind of misty.
But it is true that if we turn course and land on the shores of what will be the Silmarillion later, we are able to get out and explore. And these stories are really important. And we get just like a really quick thing of like, Gil-galad was the king who was the king of the elves, the last like important king of the free elves. And he worked with this great king of Numenor who would found the kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor, and they fought Sauron together. And that's how Sauron got thrown down in the first place, was because of these people. And it's Aragorn's great back a million generations grandfather, and that's why he has this broken sword. Like he's carrying the sword on him.
Right.
They're talking about it like it's ancient history, but that sword that did the deed is like in their presence with Strider. And then the story of Beren and Luthien, which he tells to give the hobbits hope while they're just like waiting to figure out if the Nazgul are going to come and like shank them in their sleep. That's the story of the first age, which is like long before like Gil-galad and Elendil. And that's the story about a mortal man who marries a elf maiden who's the most beautiful, just most stunning, just hot, just so hot.
Yeah, she's like the most beautiful woman in the world, basically.
Yeah, and this guy, they fall in love, and her father, when they say like, "Hey, we're gonna get married," he's like, "No. Like, you know, you're a timeless, ageless, immortal being. Like, this person is not good enough for you." He says the only way, this is
human being,
this grubby human who just like barely survived like, you know, a war that is also just like barely mentioned in the story, but you know, he finds his way into this hidden kingdom even though he's not supposed to be there at all. And he's like, you know, we're not even supposed to be like talking to these people, much less like letting you get married. So he's like, all right, I'll let you marry my daughter if you go into the fortress of Satan, and steal a Silmaril from his crown. Bring me back one of those, and then that will be the bride price for my daughter. And of course, the story is that they actually do it. They break into the fortress. Luthien dances and puts the devil to sleep, and Beren is able to use a magic knife and cut the Silmaril from the king's crown. But in the process of getting the Silmaril, Beren dies, and so Luthien decides that she is going to take on a mortal life, and she dies as well. And the gods are like the Valar are so moved by this act of sacrifice that they give them a second life, and they are able to walk Middle Earth together as a couple. But like, what a weird thing to like put in the middle of this story. Like you know what I mean? Like in this chapter, like what a strange digression.
Yeah.
To give these like Silmarillion bits. Like, I think on a practical level, he's just like, okay, Silmarillion, never going to get published. This is my chance. Right. I have these like Lord of the Rings level thought out stories that I'm never going to get published. So I'm just going to put them in chapter 11 to add a little bit of depth. But there's a lot of meaning in this. I mean, obviously Aragorn is the grandson of Elendil, and he's carrying the sword that defeated Sauron the first time. Mostly defeated Sauron the first time, but he's also a man who's in love with an elf woman.
Yeah, it sets us up for, you know, for the relationship between him and Arwen. And I think that's worthwhile. It also works with the kind of way that, you know, these stories continue to kind of rhyme throughout history in Middle Earth.
Yeah.
And I think that for people who really love Lord of the Rings, this is the stuff that draws us in.
Yeah.
I think the Barrow Downs do that. I think Weathertop, you know, this idea that there's this fortress that, you know, kind of played a pivotal role in fighting against something called Angmar, you know, and you're like, that's the stuff that I can really remember clearly on my first read through, where I was like, I got to know more about this.
Yeah.
And even if you don't go and read the Silmarillion or, you know, start to like, you know, dig into the appendices or whatever, it still draws you in a way. Yeah. It doesn't draw everybody in. I think some people are like, what is this?
Like I'm kind of in between. Like when I was a kid, I like distinctly remember my eyes like glazing over this part of the page and being like, like, all right, get to the part where he gets stabbed, because I knew it was coming. Right. Like get to the part where he gets stabbed. Like I don't understand any of this stuff. You might as well be speaking like, you know, Greek. You know, but I also remember like when I first tried to read the Silmarillion as a kid, like being completely overwhelmed by the story in a similar way and just being like, this is impossible. for me to read
Yeah.
and comprehend and understand. And I remember somebody pointing out like, oh, you know that like the Silmarils and Beren and Luthien and all that are in Lord of the Rings. And I was like, no, they weren't.
Right.
When you're looking for it, it's there. And once you already
Right.
know the story, it's just infinitely more impressive just how consistent it is when you find it in the story that you know really well, which is just a very different story, but it's not. I mean, like when Sam and Frodo are on the fields of Mordor going towards Mount Doom, Sam says like, "Hey, do you remember like when Aragorn told us the story about how Beren stole the Silmaril from the crown of Morgoth?" Like
it gets referenced.
Like we're still in that same story like right now.
Yeah.
Like we're still in that same story, and I wonder how people will remember us. And that's what makes Lord of the Rings so great.
Yeah. And I think, you know, even though people get on Tolkien's case about needing an editor or whatever, the first book, you know, and I understand it's supposed to be one book, whatever. I get it. But this is only 398 pages.
Yeah. It's not, by today's standards, it's not.
And there are books, you know, that come out that are 1,000 pages.
Yeah.
And it's like,
and it's not even a complete story.
And it's not exactly, and it's part of like a 6 book series. And I actually think there's a lot of economy happening here, and he's just packing it in to a chapter that, I mean, these chapters are, you know, between 10 and 15 pages long. I actually think it's pretty remarkable how much he is able to evoke in here, and how, I don't know, how lived in and alive the story feels because of it. It's a great experience reading it, I think. We had the conversation about how far away is Rivendell. It's a fortnight. They're kind of freaking out about that.
Right.
And they finally get to the top of Weathertop. They take a look around. They find a
rune that they think might be left by Gandalf.
Yeah, a rock with a rune on it that is, you know, potentially written by Gandalf. It says G3,
which means it might have been October 3rd that he was there.
Yeah, and that was three days ago, and he must have been in a hurry or in some danger because he didn't write anything longer or plainer. So we have to be wary. Then they see black shapes off in the distance.
Yeah.
And Strider throws himself down, and later on he'll sort of chide himself for being so careless of just, you know, standing on top of Weathertop where anybody could see them from far off.
Yeah.
And that's just Merry, Frodo, and Strider on the top of Weathertop.
Yeah, and Sam and Pippin are basically making a camp, and they find tracks, and they find a pile of firewood. So they're like, you know, someone has been here. Yeah. Aragorn does his like sleuthing, his like tracker Sherlock Holmes thing, and he's like walking around. And he's like, you know, this is where some rangers were, and this is how they leave firewood for themselves. He says there were some heavy boots. It's unclear whether that is Gandalf or Black Riders. Yeah. They kind of settle in for the night. And he
decides we might as well make camp here because anywhere else we go, we're going to be seen.
Yeah.
So let's make camp here.
And we've probably already been seen because we were.
Yeah. And there is a good detail here where Merry says, "Can the rider see?"
Yeah.
And then we get, he doesn't say sniffing, but I mean, they seem usually to have used their noses rather than their eyes smelling for us.
Yeah.
If smelling is the right word, at least in the daylight. But you made us lay down flat. And, you know, again, Strider says I was careless, but he says it was a mistake for us to stand up there for so long because the black horses can see. So obviously the horses and the riders can communicate somehow.
Yeah.
And the riders use men and other creatures as spies, as we found at Bree. They don't see in the world of light as we do, but it says that the living cast shadows into their minds, which only the noon sun destroys. And in the dark, they perceive many signs and forms that are hidden from us. So they live in this wraith world.
Yes.
Or some kind of in-between, something between living and life and death.
A spiritual realm that we can't see.
and they can smell the blood of living things.
Holy crap. That is so scary.
Yeah, which they desire and hate. And then, of course, we've learned that the ring draws them. So we get a ton of information about the Black Riders here.
Almost nothing up to this point. And then it's like, they don't see like we see. They smell.
They can't see
blood.
They talk to their evil horses. They can smell blood.
The ring draws them like a beacon.
And Frodo's like, "What the?"
Yeah, it's like
the ring draws them. Nobody told me that.
Oh man!
And yet, even as like terrifying as this is, Frodo says, "Is there no escape? If I stay here, I draw them. If I move, I'll be hunted." Strider says, "There is still hope. You are not alone." And then fire is our friend in the wilderness. So actually lighting a fire, having a meal, and
telling inspiring stories.
Telling inspiring stories is the thing, again, that's going to save you.
Yeah.
So light a fire with your friends. This is like advice for your life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, light a fire with your friends. That's where you're going to find hope.
Tell each other stories that give you hope.
I love this. Think with hope of the tables of Elrond's house.
Yeah.
Like, that's going to be great when we get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it is. It is great. And then Frodo tries to start telling the story of Gil-galad, the last of the great elf kings of Middle-earth. And Strider says, "No, I don't think we should tell that story here with the servants of the enemy at hand. You can hear it later, but let me tell you the story of Tinuviel." That goes on for
many pages. I mean, it's a good chunk of a relatively short chapter. But yeah, I mean, we find out that Beren and Luthien, they defeat the evil of whom Sauron was just a servant, and that from them came Dior, and then from him came Elwing, and then from her came Earendel, who is the father of Elros and Elrond. And Elros was the first king of Numenor, and Elrond, of course, is the great elven lord. So it all comes together. And of course, Elrond has a daughter named Arwen, who will be Aragorn's wife. And similarly to Beren, who was given an impossible task as a bride price for Luthien by her father Thingol, we find out in the appendices that Aragorn asks if he can marry Arwen, and Elrond says the only way that you would be good enough to marry Arwen essentially is to be the king of the combined kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor in the north. And that's exactly what he has to do. He had to become the High King is what he has to do. So it's kind of a similarly impossible task that he's given to marry Arwen. Lots of great symmetry here.
So we get all that, and then at moonrise, at the Black Riders come.
It says, all seemed quiet and still, but Frodo felt a cold dread creeping over his heart, now that Strider was no longer speaking.
And we get that detail earlier, too, that when the Black Riders are nearby, you'll get a bad feeling, essentially.
Yeah.
And Sam says, "I don't know what it is," he said, "but I suddenly felt afraid. I durst go outside this dell for any money."
For any money. Yeah.
I felt that something was creeping up the slope. "Did you see anything?" said Frodo, springing to his feet. So this does not happen on top of Weathertop. It happens.
So that's the confusing thing. I think it's once again, the movie is so burned into my brain. They wouldn't be camping on top of Weathertop because then of course they'd be seen.
Yeah.
So once again, Tolkien's logistical mind prevents him from doing something like that. Like, of course they wouldn't be like right in the top of a hill where everybody could see them from miles around with a fire. Yeah. Also, like another comparison to the movie, in the movie, they start a fire and Frodo's like, "You fools."
Yeah, put it out. But Aragorn says, "No, start a fire and keep stocking it with wood because that's going to keep us safe."
Yeah, this fire, they fear fire. And I do think it's interesting. I want to point out that in the bit that I read just a second ago, All seemed quiet and still, but Frodo felt a cold dread creeping over his heart now that Strider was no longer speaking. It seems like the moment that they come is the moment that they stop telling each other the story of hope.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems like Aragorn like understands that like hope is a deterrent to this enemy more than anything else. And it's the moment that they stop telling the story that the evil is able to come in. And I think that that's definitely that kind of shows Tolkien's philosophy a little bit. Like there's a reason why we tell these stories to each other, and it's to actually ward off evil. But they come, and it says that they're so black that they seem like black holes in the deep shade behind them. They're so dark that they're darker than the night. And Frodo starts to have a feeling like he needs to put the ring on.
Sudden temptation to put on the ring. The desire to do this laid hold of him, and he could think of nothing else. And it says that it's not like he loses his mind. He doesn't forget the barrow or the message of Gandalf, but something seemed to be compelling him to disregard all warnings, and he longed to yield. He's not even he doesn't say he's trying to escape or do anything. He just had to put that ring on.
Yeah.
And he does struggle against it, but it's like impossible to resist. And at last he slowly drew out the chain and slipped the ring on his finger of his left hand. Then we get this frightening description of the sort of full image of the Black Riders. 5 tall figures, 2 standing on the lip of the dell. They have white faces, merciless eyes. They're wearing robes. They have gray hair with helms of silver, and they have swords.
They have haggard hands.
Their eyes fell on him and pierced him first. So he gets pierced, that there's like a double
piercing of the eyes before the piercing of the knife.
Him. He draws his own sword. We get this really cool detail about the sword, that the sword seemed to flicker red as if it were a firebrand.
Right.
We talked about the swords, potentially being described as red because they're made of bronze.
Right.
But it also seems as if in this kind of wraith world that he enters when he puts on the ring, that it has some magical quality to it.
Yeah.
Which obviously becomes pretty important later on.
Right. And he, later he'll have Sting, but for right now he has one of the swords from the barrow, which is
the same swords Merry and Pippin and Sam have, right?
Exactly. And that's the only sword that can really defeat these people, especially the Witch King later.
But it checks 2 of them. 2 of them stop when they see the sword.
Yeah.
And the third was taller than the others. His hair was long and gleaming on his helm, and on his helm was a crown. In one hand he held a long sword, and in the other a knife. Both the knife and the hand that held it glowed with a pale light. And he springs forward and bears down on Frodo. And of course nobody can see Frodo at this point because he has the ring on.
Right.
So he really puts himself in a precarious position, because if someone can't see you, they can't defend you.
Right.
And he can be seen even more so by the wraiths, or by the Black Riders. And then we have Frodo throw himself on the ground and cry aloud, "O Elbereth, Gilthonio."
Yeah. Yeah. He speaks a prayer to one of the Valar, the queen of the Valar, which, he doesn't understand, where this is like a, example of direct intervention, direct but subtle intervention.
Inspiration even, right? Like,
right.
He's inspired to say this. And it says, a shrill cry hung out of the night when he struck the feet of the enemy, and he felt pain like a dart of poisoned ice pierce his left shoulder. So we're told that this tall figure has a sword in one hand and a knife in the other. And he's stabbed by this poisoned blade, and he swooned, but he sees Strider leaping out of the darkness with a flaming brand of wood in either hand. And with a last effort, Frodo drops his sword, takes the ring off, and closes his right hand tight upon it. we will talk more about this in the next chapter, but I think a question arises. If the Black Rider's goal was to kill Frodo,
Yeah. Why didn't they just kill him?
why didn't he use his sword?
Yeah.
And, just hack him in half.
Yeah.
Instead of just stabbing him once in the shoulder.
Yeah.
And I suppose we could argue that, Aragorn stops him from doing more damage, but we get a better description in the next chapter about what actually happens from this poison blade, being stabbed into his shoulder.
Yeah. I mean,
Frodo has on him.
Frodo says earlier, if I get any thinner, I'll become a wraith. And Aragorn's like, that's the worst thing that can happen to you, bro. Don't say that. And, we find out that that's basically exactly their plan. There's a line in, I believe it's in The Shadow of the Past, when Frodo asks Gandalf, like, why would he want slaves of the hobbits? And Gandalf's like, oh no, like that, nothing would make him happier than to have the free happy folk of the Shire become his slaves. And it seems like, the servants of the enemy, rather than just hack him in half, they would rather have him be a slave. And
I wonder,
they're evil.
Can the Nazgul even take the ring?
That's a good question, because I know that Frodo, were he to claim the ring, and this is something that Tolkien messed around with in the drafts, and he talked about in the letters quite a bit, that if Frodo claims the ring, the Nazgul will at least pretend to listen to what he has to say, that he would have some sort of power over the Nazgul. So if he's wearing the ring, I wonder if they can kill him. That would be an interesting question.
That's a good question. But I definitely imagine Frodo, if he becomes wraithified, sort of willingly going to Mordor, or, imagining himself, if he continues wearing the ring, imagining himself being able to somehow face down Sauron. That's Saruman's plan. I'm going to get the ring and then I can be in charge, right?
Yeah.
And so I wonder about that. But it becomes a pretty dire circumstance pretty quickly after he gets stabbed here. He really needs to make it to Rivendell as quickly as possible.
Well,
so that's the end of chapter 11.
Been fun going through this chapter.
As always, yes.
It compared to the rest of the book, this chapter moves. Like compared to where, like think about it. We started in Bree and we ended with Frodo stabbed at Weathertop. Like that's, and we got a bunch of stuff about the nature of the wraiths. Right. We got a lot of stuff about the nature of the wraith world. We got a lot of information about what the world looks like when you have the ring on. We learn about Strider's motivations. We see the hobbits like show like true courage.
Yeah.
And we get in the same chapter, Fatty Lumpkin and Fatty Bolger.
Wah.
Fire, foes, awake. So I hope you join us next week when we dive into chapter 12, Flight to the Ford, the last chapter of book 1 of the Fellowship of the Ring. This is pretty momentous. We've made our way through the first book of 6.
Awesome.
So that's awesome. Yeah, we're gonna learn a lot more in the beginning of book 2, but yeah, we are in a breakneck pace to Rivendell from this point on. If you want to help us out, share this podcast with the Lord of the Rings friend in your life. Subscribe on all of the places that you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Subscribe on YouTube. Go to waywardwizards.com for more info. If you have a correction or a thought, you could email us at info@waywardwizards.com, or you can reach out to us individually if you like one of us and not the other. So I'm Zach at waywardwizards.com and Logan is Logan at waywardwizards.com. But until next time, remember, apples are for walking, pipes are for sitting. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.